The first thing I remember is the sharp sting in my chest as I shifted in my seat at the airport gate. The incision from my open-heart surgery still felt raw. Every breath reminded me that my body had been cut open, repaired, stitched together. Yet the greater pain that day came from the small screen glowing in my hand. I had sent one simple message into our family group chat: "My flight lands at 1 p.m. Can someone pick me up?" For a few minutes, I stared at the screen, hoping for the familiar dots that meant someone was typing. Instead, the first reply came from my daughter-in-law, Vanessa. "We're too busy today. Just call an Uber." Then my son Marcus added his words, as sharp as the cold January air outside the terminal. "Why don't you ever plan ahead?" I typed only 2 letters back. Okay, that was all. No accusation, no pleading. Just 2 letters. And in that instant, I felt the line of separation between us widen like a crack in glass. Around me, families flooded the arrival hall. Children ran into the arms of parents. A man lifted his wife off the ground, spinning her with laughter. The smell of fast food mixed with the clatter of rolling suitcases. I sat alone, clutching a flimsy paper cup of tea I had bought for $2 at the corner kiosk. The steam had already gone cold. I stared into that cup as if it could answer the question I was too afraid to voice aloud. Had I already become unnecessary? The announcement board blinked with new arrivals. A soldier in uniform kissed his mother's cheek, tears streaming. A young couple carried a newborn, wrapped in a soft blanket. I tightened my coat around my shoulders. The fabric felt thin against the draft that swept through the sliding doors. I had given my life to teaching children, raising my own, keeping a home afloat, after my husband, an Army veteran, passed away. Yet, at 68, after surviving a surgery that could have taken me from this world, I was left sitting on a plastic chair, waiting for no one. The cup in my hand trembled. A drop of tea spilled onto my wrist, lukewarm against fragile skin. I gripped tighter, but the harder I tried, the weaker my hand seemed. Finally, the cup slipped from my fingers. It tumbled to the floor with a hollow sound, rolling until it stopped near a trash bin. That paper cup lay there like a quiet witness to my place in the world, discarded unnoticed. I pressed my lips together to keep from crying in public. My heart had been sewn together by surgeons in Boston, but it was breaking here in Raleigh, among the noise of strangers and the silence of my own family. A voice broke into my thoughts. Smooth, calm, almost melodic. "Mrs. Mitchell." I lifted my head. Before me stood a tall man in a charcoal coat, his hair touched with silver eyes, steady and kind. I recognized him at once, Dr. Adrian Langford. He had been one of the renowned surgeons who had checked on me during my recovery. I had not expected to ever see him again. "I was in the city for a conference," he said, offering his arm. "I saw your name on the arrival board. It seemed wrong to leave you waiting." Behind him, parked at the curb, gleamed a midnight blue Tesla, sleek as a blade, worth more than $120,000. The contrast between that shining car and my discarded paper cup on the floor struck me with sudden force. For a second I hesitated. I thought of Marcus, of Vanessa. Would they scold me later, accuse me of embarrassing them? But then another thought came, quiet, yet firm. They had left me here alone. He had come. I placed my trembling hand on Dr. Langford's arm. His grip was steady, guiding me as if every step mattered. When the automatic doors opened, a rush of icy air swept over us. The Tesla's door lifted smoothly. I sank into the seat, surprised at its warmth. For the first time that day, my body felt safe. As the car pulled away, the city blurred outside the window. I looked down at my phone. 48 missed calls lit the screen in urgent red. Marcus, Vanessa, even distant relatives who rarely bothered. My family had finally realized who had picked me up. I leaned back against the headrest. The hum of the engine was nearly silent, but my thoughts were loud. The world had changed in the span of an hour. My son's rejection still burned, but so did the unexpected kindness of the man beside me. And somewhere deep inside, I felt a shift. Not a loud rebellion, not a dramatic vow, just the first quiet spark of something I had not allowed myself in years. A decision. If they could forget me at the airport, then I could learn to remember myself again. The city lights streaked past. I closed my eyes, hearing the faint echo of the paper cup falling, the first of many small sounds that would grow into a voice too steady to ignore. That night, after returning home from the flight, I didn't turn the lights on right away. I sat down in the old chair in the living room, letting the darkness surround me. The ticking of the wall clock echoed in the silence. I could still hear the hollow sound of the paper teacup hitting the airport floor, an echo that tied the past to the present. I carefully slipped off my coat and pulled the wool scarf aside. My chest rose sharply under the white bandage. The surgical wound still throbbed, but I knew that pain was nothing compared to the other ache simmering beneath the surface. I stood, moved slowly toward the kitchen. My hand reached for the cupboard, pulled out a worn box of tea. I brewed a small pot and sat at the wooden table, watching the steam rise in front of me. The scent of tea carried me back to years ago. Back then, this house was still fresh with life. Afternoon light spilled through the window. My husband, Robert, sat across from me at the dining table. He wore an old shirt, the shoulders slightly frayed, a mark of his years of service in the army. Between us on the table, 2 cups of tea steamed gently. I remember the way he looked at me that evening, steady and full of quiet foresight. He placed his calloused hand over mine and said, "One day you'll have to hold this house together on your own. I'm not sure I'll be able to stay with you until the end." I laughed, then told him he was being too grim. But he didn't laugh. He only sipped his tea, sighed softly. That sentence has returned to me hundreds of times since, and now with him gone, it feels like a prophecy come true. Robert died suddenly, one October afternoon. A heart attack struck him while he was sitting on the porch. The neighbors called for an ambulance, but by the time I reached the hospital, he was gone. From that moment, I became both a widow and a woman who had to fight alone. I promised myself I would never let the family go without. I took extra teaching hours, opened a tutoring class in our living room, added a few wooden desks for children who needed help. For years, the money I saved wasn't for myself, it was for Marcus. I wanted my son to have a solid home, not to repeat the story of a father gone too soon, and a mother scraping by. When Marcus married Vanessa, I handed him a check for $80,000, a sum I had scraped together over decades. I told them, "This is my part, so you can buy a house, settle down." Marcus hugged me. Vanessa beamed. That day I truly believed the sacrifice was worth it. Now sitting alone with a cup of tea in my kitchen, I heard the echo of the past. I looked around the room. The shelves where I once stacked textbooks, the student chairs now covered in dust. Everything was silent, as though waiting for me to ask the question I had avoided too long. Do I still have a place in this family? I stood, walked into the bedroom. On the dresser mirror, the yellow lamplight reflected my aged face. I leaned closer, studying the map of wrinkles time had drawn. My hand rose, touched the scar running down my chest, fresh red, unyielding, a reminder that I had escaped the surgeon's knife, only to come home to my family's coldness. I whispered, my voice catching. Have I already become the outsider in my own family? The eyes in the mirror stared back at me, holding the truth I didn't want to face. The phone rang on the table. I walked back, saw the screen glow with a stream of unread messages from Marcus' mom. "Why did you leave with him? People are talking. Don't make this harder for me." I set the phone down without replying. I poured another cup of tea and sat quietly. The rising steam blurred my reflection in the mirror. Tea became my only companion that night. It carried the familiar scent of Robert, the memory of evenings we spent together, and the weight of his old promise to stand firm, even when abandoned. Another thought crept in between those memories. $80,000. The money I had given away in exchange for faith in my family. Now that very house had become the place that pushed me aside, as if my contribution had never existed. That thought didn't make me angry. It made me clear-eyed. I held the cup tighter, feeling the heat seep through fragile skin. Part of me trembled, but another part grew steadier. I was no longer at an age to beg for love with tears. I understood some things didn't need shouting. You only had to let the truth and the paperwork speak when the time came. That night I stayed at the table until late. The clock ticked slow and steady. The tea grew cold, but inside me a flame began to kindle. It wasn't bright, it wasn't loud, but it was durable. Just like Robert's words all those years ago, I would have to hold this house together on my own, and this time I would do it in my own way. The knock on my door came the following afternoon. I was still tender from the flight, still moving carefully through each hour, as though my body might unravel if I rushed. I set down the book I had been pretending to read and opened the door. Marcus stood there, his smile stretched too wide to be natural. Vanessa hovered just behind him, her coat perfectly buttoned, her perfume lingering in the winter air. They both looked polished, put together, as though they had walked straight out of a magazine photo. Mom, Marcus said, stepping forward to kiss my cheek. His lips brushed the air more than my skin. We were worried after the trip. We wanted to check on you. Vanessa's hand slipped into mine, warm but faintly clammy. Yes, we couldn't stop thinking about you last night. The surgery was such a big ordeal. How are you holding up? Their words were sweet, but their eyes scanned the living room like surveyors marking property lines. Concern should have been focused on me, yet I felt like an object under evaluation. I invited them inside. The house carried its familiar scent of books and wood polish, with a hint of tea leaves from the pot I had brewed earlier. I motioned for them to sit while I set out cups. Pouring tea had become my ritual defense, a way to keep my hands busy while my mind observed. As the steam curled upward, Vanessa's voice cut through the quiet. We saw Dr. Langford with you yesterday. That must have been surprising. Her tone dipped on the last word, as though surprise was dangerous. Marcus leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. He's a very respected man, Mom. Important. People talk when they see him, especially when he's escorting someone home. I lifted the teapot and let the liquid flow into their cups. The sound of tea filling porcelain steadied me more than their words. I placed their cups on the table without speaking. Vanessa reached for hers, stirring, though I hadn't offered sugar. You know, my company Meridian has been trying to expand in the healthcare sector. Connections like Dr. Langford's could really make a difference. If you happen to speak with him again, perhaps you could introduce us. Her smile widened soft on the edges, but her eyes gleamed sharp. It wasn't my health they cared about. It was the man who had stopped for me when they did not. I folded my hands in my lap, the warmth of my own cup seeping into my palms. Silence filled the room, thick and steady. I had learned long ago that silence can be louder than any accusation. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Mum, don't misunderstand. We just think it could be mutually beneficial. You'd be helping us and at the same time ensuring you stay connected to people who matter. That way, no one misinterprets things. No one misinterprets things. The phrase stuck like a thorn. My son, who had left me sitting alone at an airport bench, now lecturing me on appearances. I looked at him, really looked. His hair styled with careful precision, his watch gleaming, his tie knotted without flaw. And yet behind all of that polish, I saw a man afraid, not for me, but for his reputation. Vanessa leaned closer. Adrian is highly influential. Meridian could gain credibility overnight if he spoke positively about us. It's really in everyone's best interest. The room seemed to narrow around their voices pressing against me. I lifted my cup, sipped slowly, letting the bitterness of the tea coat my tongue. It steadied me. Then, without breaking eye contact, I reached for the folder Marcus had slid discreetly across the table. A stack of papers peeked out their corners, sharp and white. Power of attorney, written in bold across the header. He said nothing, but his hand twitched when I touched the folder. I did not raise my voice. I did not scold. I simply pushed the folder gently back across the polished wood, the sound of paper sliding like a blade drawn from its sheath. My hand lingered on the edge of my teacup instead. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. Vanessa's smile faltered. Marcus shifted in his seat, his throat clearing, though no words came. Inside, I felt the first real surge of strength since the surgery, not the loud kind, the quiet kind that holds steady like stone beneath water. I rose, carried the empty teapot back to the counter, and rinsed it under the tap. The running water filled the space where words might have been. Behind me, I heard Vanessa murmur something about another appointment, Marcus, standing quickly to follow. Their departure was marked by the faint click of the door. When the house grew silent again, I returned to the table. The cups still sat half full, the tea cooling into stillness. I placed my hand on the surface, feeling the grain of the wood beneath my fingertips. They had come not for me, but for what I might deliver. They had left without victory, their requests unanswered, their papers untouched. I whispered into the empty room, my words carried by the fading scent of tea. I am not a pawn to be moved on someone else's board. And as I looked at the untouched papers across the table, I felt a shift inside me. This was the first cut not made by a surgeon's scalpel, but by my own refusal. A cut that severed the illusion of loyalty from the truth of their ambition. It started with whispers. At first I heard them through neighbors who shifted uneasily before repeating what they had been told. Later, I caught fragments in the grocery store line, in the church foyer, in the pharmacy where I picked up medication. The story was always the same, each telling a little sharper, a little crueler. They say she's taking advantage of the doctor. They say he feels sorry for her, that she's milking it. Vanessa's voice had always carried farther than mine. This time, it carried into the mouths of strangers. I came home one afternoon with a paper bag of groceries, set it down on the counter, and stood still in the silence. The smell of oranges and tea leaves rose together, oddly bitter. My hands trembled, not from the weight of the bag, but from the heaviness of humiliation. Not long after Marcus arrived. He didn't knock gently. He entered with a face drawn tight, the same face he wore when he wanted to control the conversation before it even began. "Mom," he said, pacing the living room. "Do you know what people are saying? They're whispering about you and Dr. Langford. It's embarrassing. You can't imagine how hard this is for us." I sat in the armchair, folded my hands over my lap. The scar on my chest throbbed with every breath, but I did not move. He leaned closer, voice sharper. "Please don't make this harder than it already is. Don't make us look bad. Just be careful. Don't give them reasons." His words pressed against me like cold stone. Yet instead of answering, I rose slowly and walked to the small study down the hall. The floor creaked beneath my steps. Marcus followed, confusion flickering in his eyes. I opened the closet, pulled down the tin box I had not touched in years. A key hung from a ribbon around my neck, hidden beneath my blouse. I used it to unlock the box. The hinges groaned faintly. Inside lay envelopes, bank statements, deeds, remnants of a life I had built piece by piece. I took them out, placed them neatly on the desk. Marcus's voice broke the silence. "What are you doing?" I didn't look at him. I laid each paper flat, smoothing the edges, checking dates. My hands no longer trembled. "I am separating what is mine," I said at last. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the room. "From what belongs to anyone else." He stared as though seeing me for the first time. "I don't understand," he muttered. "You don't have to," I replied, sliding another envelope into its place. The quiet was my shield. I didn't need to shout, didn't need to accuse. The papers spoke with their own authority. Later that evening, Clara knocked on my door. She carried a casserole dish wrapped in foil, the kind of neighborly gesture that masked deeper concern. When I invited her in, she glanced at the papers spread across the desk. "I heard," she said softly. Her eyes held mine steady. "The rumors. They came for me once with words before they came with papers. Don't let the erosion start with whispers, Lorraine. Don't let them wear you down. I nodded. The air smelled faintly of baked cheese and chamomile tea. She placed the dish on the counter and touched my arm. Don't repeat my mistake. I stayed silent until silence was used against me. I looked at the kettle still warm on the stove, the cup half filled beside the stack of documents. Steam curled upward, delicate yet insistent. I wrapped my fingers around the cup and raised it, the heat sinking into my palm. I won't, I whispered. The next morning, I walked to the bank. The cold wind cut against my face, but I moved with deliberate steps. Inside, I met with the clerk, asked for new accounts, separate from the ones Marcus had access to. I arranged for statements to come directly to me, no longer shared. Each signature I wrote felt like reclaiming a brick in a wall I had once allowed to crumble. When I returned home, I placed the new documents into the tin box. The key clicked shut. I pressed the cool metal to my chest before tucking it back beneath my blouse. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table. I poured a fresh cup of the green tea Adrian had brought. The taste was stronger than the black tea I usually kept, but I welcomed its sharpness. It reminded me that bitterness can be cleansing too. Outside, the wind rattled the windows. Inside, my house was quiet. But the silence no longer felt like absence. It felt like a space I was choosing, a fortress of my own making. The erosion had begun with whispers, but I had chosen not to let it hollow me out. I had chosen to fortify instead. The invitation came folded in thick ivory paper, delivered by Adrian himself. He stood in my doorway that morning, tall and deliberate, his presence filling the small space of my living room. "There is a gala this weekend," he said, handing me the envelope. "A gathering of physicians, researchers, benefactors. I would like you to come with me." I turned the envelope in my hands, feeling the raised lettering under my fingertips. A gala. It had been years since I had dressed for anything more formal than church service. I laughed nervously. "I wouldn't belong," I said. "You belong more than most," Adrian replied. His eyes did not waver. That night, I opened my closet and stared at the row of worn blouses and skirts. My hand stopped at a navy dress I had not worn in a decade. I held it up to the light. The fabric still carried a quiet dignity. With some pressing and care, it could become armor. On the evening of the gala, Adrian arrived in his Tesla, polished and gleaming under the street lamp. I stepped out of my house, the navy dress smoothing over my frame, a shawl draped around my shoulders. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to feel visible. Inside the ballroom, light spilled from chandeliers like falling stars. Music wove through the air, a low hum of strings. People turned as we entered. Adrian placed his hand lightly at my back, guiding me forward. "This is Lorraine," he said, when we approached a cluster of colleagues. His voice carried in the vaulted room. "My companion tonight." The words struck like a bell. Companion. I felt eyes on me, measured, assessing, surprised. Conversation stilled, then swelled again in whispers. My heart pounded, but my face remained steady. I lifted the glass in my hand, not of champagne, but of iced tea that Adrian had thoughtfully requested for me. The amber liquid caught the light. I raised it slightly, as though to acknowledge the room. The cold rim pressed against my lip, anchoring me in the moment. The cameras flashed. The applause began hesitant at first, then genuine. People nodded, some with respect, others with curiosity. For the first time, I was not the woman forgotten at the airport. I was not the widow hidden in the shadows of her own family. I was standing where everyone could see, introduced, not as someone's burden, but as someone's chosen. In the far corner, I saw Marcus and Vanessa. They had not been invited, but had managed to appear drawn by the scent of influence. Vanessa's lips parted, frozen mid-smile, while Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his suit. Their faces betrayed what their words had always tried to conceal: shock, envy, and fear. The whispers spread faster now, but not the kind Vanessa had planted weeks before. No one was saying she is taking advantage. They were saying she is respected. She is with Adrian Langford. She matters. For once, the power belonged to me, though I had not lifted a hand. Later in the evening, Adrian led me to the stage as he prepared to speak. His speech was about advancements in cardiac care, but before he began, he gestured toward me. "I could not do the work I do without remembering why it matters," he said. "Lorraine has shown me that survival is more than living. It is about dignity, strength, and grace." The room rose in applause. I lowered my eyes. Not from shame. I needed to steady the wave rising inside me. My fingers tightened on the cool glass of tea. The iced tea cooled my lips as cameras flashed and applause swelled. I didn't need revenge. The room itself had already spoken for me. Silent but unmistakable. When the evening ended, Adrian drove me home. The navy dress still clung with the warmth of lights and applause. As we pulled into the driveway, he looked at me and said simply, "They will never see you the same way again." He was right. The next morning, I found messages on my phone. Vanessa's voice sharp with false concern. "Mother, we saw you last night. Everyone is talking. Please don't embarrass us further." Marcus's text followed. "This is making things hard for us. Don't let rumors destroy our standing." I stared at their words, then placed the phone face down on the table. The scar beneath my dress still ached, but it no longer felt like a wound. The scar beneath my dress pulsed with each heartbeat, like a seal pressed firm into the parchment of my life. I walked to the study, opened the closet, and drew out the tin box once more. I checked the documents, the accounts, the deeds. Everything was still intact, untouched, safe. I locked the box again and let the key fall back against my chest. The erosion had tried to creep in through whispers, but now the tide had shifted. My silence had turned into something sharper than accusation. The whole community had seen it. My children could not erase it. That afternoon, Clara came by. She had watched the news coverage of the gala, where a camera had captured Adrian's words. She looked at me with tears glistening. "You've already done more than I ever did," she said. "You stood in front of everyone and let them see your worth. Hold on to that, Lorraine. Don't let anyone write your story again." I poured us tea green for me, chamomile for her. We sat together, two women on a porch, the world suddenly wider. The cup in my hand trembled slightly, but this time it was from the strength of what had just begun, not from fear. The masks had fallen, and under the lights of that ballroom, I had found my face again. The morning after the gala, the silence in my house carried a different weight. It was no longer the silence of neglect. It was the silence after a storm, when broken branches still litter the ground, but the air feels clean. I was rinsing out my teacup when I heard the knock. Not sharp, not demanding, soft, rehearsed. When I opened the door, Marcus and Vanessa stood together on the porch. Vanessa's face painted with concern, Marcus holding a bouquet of supermarket flowers still wrapped in plastic. "Mom," he said, his voice a little too smooth. "We wanted to come by. To talk." I let them in. They sat on the sofa, as if it were a stage positioning themselves, just close enough to look sincere. I returned to my chair, the navy shawl still draped over its back. Vanessa was first to speak. "We've been thinking about everything about last night. Maybe we haven't shown enough care. It's been stressful for us, you know, but we do want to make this right." Her words glided like oil on water. Marcus nodded, clutching the bouquet but not offering it. "We don't want misunderstandings," he said. "Mother, please don't let rumors destroy our image. People are watching us now." His voice cracked slightly, but the plea was not for me. It was for him, for them. I listened in silence. The kettle on the stove began to hum softly. I rose, walked to the kitchen, and poured hot water into the pot. The steam curled upward, familiar grounding. I carried the tray back, set it down carefully. As I poured into each cup, I thought of Clara's voice. Don't repeat my mistake. I slid the cups toward them, then kept mine close. I lifted it, inhaled, let the warmth spread through my hands. Misunderstandings. I said finally, my voice low, but steady. That's the only thing you've never cared to correct with me. The words fell between us, like cracks spreading through glass. Neither spoke. Vanessa's smile faltered. Marcus stared into his untouched tea. I didn't raise my tone. I didn't accuse. I didn't list the nights I sat alone, the years I paid bills they never asked, about the $80,000 that had anchored the house they now called theirs. I didn't need to. The truth lingered in the air, sharper than any shout. They shifted, uncomfortable in the silence. Vanessa set her cup down with a too bright clink. We should come by more often, she murmured. I nodded once, nothing more. The conversation trickled on, shallow and circling. Apologies without weight, promises without anchor. When they left, Marcus placed the flowers on the counter. I didn't move them. That evening, I unlocked the tin box again. I checked the bank statements, the deeds, the new accounts I had opened. Everything was still in order. I placed the flowers beside the box, plastic stems and paper petals that would never wilt because they had never lived. The next day, whispers returned, softer but still sharp. Vanessa had started again, telling anyone who would listen that I was using Adrian for security, that I was clinging to him for influence. At the pharmacy, a woman I barely knew glanced at me twice, her eyes darting away. I returned home, closed the door, and let the lock click into place. My hands moved on instinct, kettle, teacup. The ritual steadied me again. As I drank, I felt the warmth seep back into me. Later, Clara came by. She saw the flowers wilting at the base untouched. She saw the documents spread out, each one neatly placed, and she nodded with quiet approval. They will keep pressing, she said. They always do, but you've already taken the ground they thought they owned. I smiled faintly. I let them talk. I let them knock. But I will not let them sign my name away. She sat across from me, sipping chamomile. Her eyes softened. Then you've already won more than I did. The night was long, but I slept without dreams. My phone buzzed with messages, Marcus asking again, Vanessa repeating her worries. I left it dark on the table. When morning came, I walked to the mirror. The scar on my chest caught the sunlight breaking through the curtain. For a moment, I thought of glass again, fragile when struck, but capable of reflecting light in 100 directions. They had come with soft voices, with flowers, with practiced sorrow, but I had not bent. Their resolution was not mine. The glass had cracked, yes, but I was not the one shattering. I had grown used to whispers. They came like drafts under a door, unwanted, persistent, chilling if you let them linger. But Vanessa wanted more than whispers. She wanted headlines. One morning, Clara arrived on my porch, newspaper folded under her arm. She looked at me with a kind of grim satisfaction. They thought they had you, she said, pressing the paper into my hands. I took it carefully, set it on the table beside my teacup, and poured hot water into the pot. Steam rose, curling, blurring the print, until I lifted the pages. There I was. Photograph on the front page. The navy dress, the chandelier, light the glass of iced tea raised in my hand. The headline read, Widow with Silent Grace, the woman behind the gala spotlight. Not scandal, not shame. Grace. I let out a breath I hadn't known I was holding. Vanessa had sharpened the knife, thinking she could drive it into me. Instead, she had cut herself. The article painted me as dignified a woman who had weathered loss and found resilience. They spoke of my late husband's service, my years as a teacher, the quiet way I had stood beside Adrian at the gala. The word companion appeared again, but not in the tone Vanessa intended. It was not ridicule. It was respect. I sipped the tea slowly. The bitterness of the leaves matched the sweetness of the moment. By the afternoon, the phone rang more than once. Old students left messages. Neighbors sent cards. Even strangers slipped notes into my mailbox. We saw you in the paper. We admire you. You make us proud. Vanessa's plan had traveled farther than her rumor ever could, but the current had reversed, and she was drowning in it. I heard from a friend at her office. Colleagues kept their conversations short when she entered. She had been the source of poison, and now the stench clung to her. At lunch, she sat alone stirring food she never finished. The whispers she created had turned against her sharper than any knife. Marcus fared no better. One evening, as I was told later, he sat at his dinner table with his own family. My grandson, his son looked up from his plate and asked plainly, "Dad, why don't you have time for Grandma anymore? You always have time for work." The question landed heavy. Marcus's fork froze in his hand. His wife stared speechless, and for the first time he tasted the same neglect he had served me. The gavel of truth had been passed down by a child, and there was no appeal. The knife they had sharpened had cut their own hands. Days later, Vanessa appeared at my door again. Her hair was neat, her smile too careful, her voice wrapped in false warmth. Marcus followed face-drawn eyes, tired. "Mother," he began, "we realize things have gone too far. There have been misunderstandings. Please don't let this ruin how people see us." Vanessa leaned in, voice dripping with honey. The article was flattering, of course, but people twist things. We should stand together as a family. I stirred my tea. Steam lifted, then faded the same as always. I raised the cup, tasted the sharp bitterness, and set it down. "Misunderstandings," I said softly, "are the only thing you've never cared to fix with me." The words cracked the room like a stone against glass. Marcus dropped his gaze. Vanessa's lips pressed tight, her smile gone. I rose, walked into the study, and opened the drawer. The tin box gleamed faintly in the afternoon light. I unlocked it, laid out the papers. Once again, accounts, deeds, the careful records of independence. Each page, smooth under my hand, undeniable. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't plead. I didn't accuse. I simply let the papers lie there. "This," I said, "is mine. And it will stay mine." When I locked the box and tucked the key back against my chest, the silence between us was complete. They left soon after, their steps clipped and hurried. I stood at the window until their car turned the corner, the flowers they had once brought still wilting in the trash. That evening, Clara joined me on the porch. She had read the article too, seen the reversal for herself. She set her cup of chamomile on the railing and looked at me with quiet pride. "They wanted the world to see weakness," she said. "Instead, the world saw strength. That's what happens when truth waits long enough. It shows itself." I held my tea close, the warmth steadying me. The scar beneath my dress ached faintly, but it no longer felt like a wound. It felt like proof. Vanessa had tried to write my story in ink, but the words turned against her. Marcus had tried to silence me with guilt, only to hear his own son echo the question I had never dared to ask. They had sharpened the knife carefully, but when they struck, it was their own blood that answered. And I had not lifted a finger. The decision to call them was not sudden. It had been building quietly, like steam pressing against the lid of a kettle. I had listened to their words, endured their rumors, watched them carve my dignity into pieces they thought no one would miss. And yet the pieces had remained waiting to be fitted back together. On a cold Saturday afternoon, I sent the message. Simple, without drama. "Come to the house tomorrow at 3. We need to talk." The next day I prepared. Not with food or flowers, not with smiles to soften the air. I prepared the table in my study. I set the tin box in the center, unlocked it, and laid out the papers one by one. Bank statements, account records, the deed to the house, and a receipt showing my $80,000 contribution all those years ago. At the end, I placed a single teacup, steam, rising gently, the quiet motif of my life. When Marcus and Vanessa arrived, they wore the faces of people bracing for a negotiation. Vanessa's eyes darted around the room, searching for leverage. Marcus's shoulders were stiff, his hands shoved into his pockets. We sat. The air between us felt brittle like glass that could shatter at the first sound. I placed my hands flat on the table beside the cup of tea. My voice was calm. "This house," I said, looking at them both, "was never just yours. The $80,000 I gave did not vanish into the air. My name has always been here on these papers, and from this day forward, no one but me decides what happens to my life." I slid the documents toward them. Each page whispered as it moved louder than any shout. Marcus leaned forward, his mouth opening, then closing again. His eyes skimmed the figures, the dates, the signatures. Words failed him. He had always relied on persuasion on guilt, but guilt had no power against black ink and legal seals. Vanessa tried next. "This isn't about money," she said quickly, though her voice cracked. "We just wanted what was best for everyone." "Best for everyone but me," I replied softly. She froze. For a moment she looked like a mask slipping off the smooth veneer, replaced by the raw face of fear. The silence stretched. I let it. Silence was no longer my prison. It was my sword. Marcus cleared his throat. "Mother, we never meant to." I raised my hand slightly, palm outward. "Enough. You meant every word you spoke, every rumor you spread, and you meant to take more. But meaning changes nothing when the truth is here in black and white." I tapped the papers lightly. "This is my shield. This is my voice." The tea had cooled, but I lifted it anyway. The porcelain warmed my hands just enough. I drank slowly, letting the silence deepen. They shifted uncomfortably, glancing at one another. The power they once wielded had drained from the room, seeping into the edges of the papers spread across the table. "Do you know what this means?" I asked, my voice measured. "It means that you can no longer rewrite me out of the story. It means that no matter what you say, no matter what you whisper, the truth is fixed. And it means I will not bend." Vanessa's lips tightened. Marcus rubbed his forehead with his palm, his silence louder than any apology. I leaned back in my chair, the scar on my chest pressing faintly against the fabric of my blouse. It was not weakness anymore. It was proof. For years I continued. I allowed misunderstandings to pass. I let silence take my place. No more. From this moment, the paperwork speaks. The facts speak, and I will not argue. The room seemed to shrink around us. The lamp cast a narrow circle of light on the table, illuminating the documents, the teacup, and nothing else. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't realize. "You never tried to," I said. Vanessa started to rise, then stopped as though her body betrayed her. She had no words, left no rumors sharp enough to cut through what lay on the table. I gathered the papers, slowly returning them to the box. I closed the lid, turned the key, and let it rest against my chest. The sound of the lock clicking echoed in the stillness. "This conversation is over," I said. They left quietly, their footsteps muted, their backs a little more bent. When the door closed, I returned to the study. I sat with the box before me, the tea now cold, and felt the weight of something shift inside me. Not revenge, not triumph. Just a steady sense of balance, as though a scale had finally tipped back to where it belonged. I glanced at my reflection in the dark window. For the first time in years, I did not see a woman erased by silence. I saw a woman who had let the paperwork speak, and in doing so had found her own voice again. That morning, the garden was still. Sunlight broke through the branches. On the old wooden table, 3 cups waited. Adrian had brought a tin of his favorite black tea. Clara carried chamomile as always, and I prepared the pot with the green blend he had given me weeks before. Steam rose gently, curling into the air, as though the past itself was lifting and dissolving. We sat together, the 3 of us bound, not by blood, but by choice. Adrian leaned back, his eyes steady on me. Clara watched us with that knowing smile of hers, the smile of someone who had seen storms break and skies clear. Adrian reached for his cup, then paused. His voice was quiet, but the words carried a weight that settled deep. "Lorraine," he said, "you have not only survived, you have chosen to live again, and I would like to walk beside you if you will let me." For a moment the world seemed to narrow to the sound of the kettle, the warmth of the cup in my hands, and the scar on my chest that no longer felt like a wound, but like a door opening. I looked at him at the steadiness of his gaze, and I felt something I had not allowed myself in years, hope that did not hurt to hold. Clara chuckled softly, lifting her chamomile. "About time," she said, and the three of us laughed, the sound spilling across the garden like sunlight. But life did not pause there. A week later, I stood behind a podium at a conference on elder rights, the first I had ever attended. My hands trembled at the beginning, not from fear, but from the enormity of speaking, for all the voices that had been quiet too long. I told them my story not with bitterness, but with clarity. About the airport, the whispers, the paperwork that saved me when love failed. About the cup of tea that steadied me night after night. And about finding strength not in shouting, but in silence that refused to be erased. When I finished, the room rose in applause, and as the clapping echoed, my eyes found Marcus and Vanessa in the audience. They sat still, their hands in their laps, unable to look away. They were not the center this time. They were simply listeners like everyone else. That was the second payoff, the one I had not expected. To stand to be heard, and to know that even those who once dismissed me now had to listen in silence. After the conference, Adrian walked beside me down the hallway. He did not speak until we reached the doors where light poured in. Then softly, he said, "The world sees you now, as it should." I smiled because it was true. Weeks later, with Clara's help, I began a small foundation, not grand, not built on riches, but on purpose. We called it the Silent Grace Foundation. Its mission was simple: to help widows and older women protect their assets, to guide them in keeping what was theirs. The first workshop was held in my living room. 10 women came, each with stories that echoed my own. As we sat together drinking tea and learning about deeds and accounts, I felt a current of healing move through us. One evening after the workshop ended, I lingered at the table alone. Papers were stacked neatly, cups washed, chairs tucked in. I poured myself one last cup, sat down and whispered aloud, as though my late husband could hear me. Kindness may be forgotten, but it never loses its worth. And love, even late, remains a gift. The words hung in the air, steady and true. That night, as I locked the box and set the kettle aside, I realized something. My story was no longer just mine. It belonged to anyone who had ever felt erased, and anyone who needed to know that silence could still speak louder than cruelty. So if you are listening now, know this: your dignity does not expire. Your worth cannot be erased by those who fail to see it. And your future, no matter your age, still waits to be written. Did you like my story? Which city are you listening from? Share it below, and don't forget to subscribe. And that was my story, a story of betrayal, but also of quiet strength, justice, and healing. If you felt something while listening, please let me know. I truly want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, which city are you listening from right now? Don't forget to hit like if this story spoke to you. Tap subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss the next chapter. Because here, every story reminds us it's never too late for respect, for healing, and for love.